We are looking at big reservoir recovery heading into the Memorial Holiday weekend, the unofficial start to summer. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods out of Sacramento in Northern California. Behind me here, you see Folsom. Before I get to some of the pictures that we're seeing now, let me take you back to a year ago. We'll first show you Shasta, where you can see what we call the bathtub line. There's that line of the water that is so low. Next, we show you Oroville. And finally, we'll wrap it up with Folsom. Now let's compare it to what it looks like today. These are pictures just taken today in Shasta. Melinda and David Rogers traveling along I-5 saying it was nearly bringing tears to their eyes because of how full this lake is. You can see the bathtub line is no longer present throughout Lake Shasta, our biggest reservoir in California. And guess what? Recreation is going to be in full force this weekend. That's a huge lake for all those houseboats. In years past, there were areas that were just impassable with boats because it was so terribly low. That is not the case for today. Now, you see some of those thunderstorm clouds in the distance, and we'll talk about some of those risks that we'll be facing heading into our holiday weekend. As far as the capacity, right now, we're nearly at capacity for Shasta and Oroville. Folsom up to 95%, New Melones 73%, and Don Pedro at 94%. All of these reservoirs are continuing to rise with the snowmelt coming down the hill. And so with that, we are seeing the releases. Bill Stahl, one of our ABC 10 Weather Force members, submitting this in for today, looking at those outflows coming out of many of those reservoirs. As you can see here, beautiful conditions there out of Oroville as well. Now, in terms of our lake temperatures, it is going to be quite cold. With those reservoir releases, that heads downstream. And so we're looking at water temperatures anywhere from about the mid-50s to around 60 degrees. Now, the San Joaquin area near Stockton, that's going to be 68 degrees. And just because it's a little farther from some of the runoff that we're seeing and the releases as well. Sierra and foothill waters, about 37 to 48 degrees. And then when you look at the Lake Tahoe temperature, it is at 56. So that is about the same temperature as some of these area rivers, which means we are definitely seeing some very cold water coming down the hill here. Now, in terms of our snowmelt path, if you're not familiar with how our reservoirs are filled, we see the snowpack up in the Sierra. Once we start into the spring melt, typically around April 1st is when that peaks. That will not be the case this year. It starts to head into many of our big rivers here. We've got the Sacramento River, the Feather River, and then also the American River, all of them feeding area reservoirs. Once we start to see those getting full, we see the releases happening. Shasta will release into the Sacramento River, and then Folsom releases into the American River. Upstream from the American River is the Feather River. That's going to have the releases from Oroville. All of them connect at Discovery Park near downtown Sacramento. So it's a big flood risk area, and water managers have to be very careful with the releases happening right now. Once it gets through Discovery Park, from there it heads out to the Delta. That's a big water source for many of our agricultural interests, especially once those releases happen out of the Delta and head down through the central and southern San Joaquin Valley, or it heads out to the Bay. The Delta water tends to be a little bit warmer because it's farther from that snowmelt and the direct releases from the reservoirs. And also for Stockton with the San Joaquin River, that is going to be just a little bit warmer as well. Taking a look at some of the snowmelt video that we were getting in earlier this week, you can see up near Donner how impressive that snowmelt is. This is just a creek, and look at how much water is coming out of the higher elevations, all to move downstream as we head into our late spring and even our summer season, because we've got a lot of snow. In fact, we're seeing about 6 to 12 inches of that snow melting over about a 3-day period, making the water very cold and swift. Never cross a flooded roadway is going to be a key as we continue with this spring snowmelt. And always wear a life jacket if you are headed to any of those waterways over the course of the holiday weekend and even beyond. Now, looking at our snow water equivalent comparison, this is just going to be a year to year. This year is going to be much, much different on our many area waterways, not just in Northern California, but all the way into the southern part of the Sierra as well with that snowmelt. The southern Sierra in particular is seeing some huge numbers in comparison to what we normally see. So this was last year, and you can see there was very little shading with our contours, very little snow water equivalent left to melt out. Whereas this year, there's so much more snow melt coming our way. That's why water officials are also saying these rivers have yet to really see some of the biggest flows compared to what we normally see in a year, where those peak flows typically happen a little bit earlier. That is not going to be the case for this year. When we take a look at the statewide average, you can see we're at 266% of the statewide average for the northern Sierra, the southern Sierra at 451% of where we normally are at this point in the year. And again, much of that is starting to melt with our statewide average running about 326% of average to date. What does that look like? Well, this was one of our Sierra roadways and Caltrans trying to clear that snow. Some areas are still seeing up to 20 feet of snow that they have yet to clear out. Some people also saying even at the lower elevations of the Sierra, they have about 5 to 6 feet of snow. They are still trying to deal with the remnants of what winter brought earlier this year. So it is quite a situation up in the high country. As far as the flood science in terms of the snowmelt process, it is very different from year to year, even from day to day. We take a look at the distribution. Where were the big paths of those winter storms and what kind of accumulation did we see? And it varies from north to south throughout the Sierra Spine. The characteristics of that snow. What's the temperature of the snow? It's been taking a lot to get that snowpack up to 32 degrees or above because it's been so terribly deep. So that cold snow was deeply packed below the upper levels. The energy exchange, what are the weather conditions? And that's one of the things we're going to be looking at is the risk of the rain on top of the snow adding to additional melt coming down the hill. The weather facts, what are the extenuating circumstances, the ambient conditions, the wind, the dew points, the temperatures, and then also the location. Is it going to be able to go into the ground? Well, right now our ground is pretty saturated. So a lot of this is going to be runoff, not necessarily jamming up as ice because the temperatures are above the freezing level, but the runoff is going to be a big concern. And a part of that, again, talking about showers and thunderstorms, this is what it looked like on our Thursday. And this has been the situation kind of repeating itself day after day through much of this week. And we're expecting this into the holiday weekend as well. Redding is just below Lake Shasta, and you can see a number of thunderstorms developing there even at this hour. So the late afternoon, early evening tend to be a very active period for us. Being around any body of water is terribly dangerous, or even being outside when there's this type of action here. South Lake Tahoe, North Lake Tahoe going to be pretty active here into the holiday weekend, and also near Yosemite, where we still have openings at Yosemite. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But Friday's forecast still calling for the opportunity of thunderstorms throughout the Sierra. Also for Saturday, it's pretty much a near repeat. Those same areas just going to be under the risk of seeing at least lightning, hearing thunder, as well as some heavy downpours and some gusty winds. With some of the rain, anywhere that there's snowmelt could lead to some minor flooding issues as well. So some key factors to keep in mind, especially into this holiday weekend, being ready with rapidly changing conditions. We can go from sunny 1 minute to stormy the next. Having shelter, being in a fully enclosed building or hard top vehicle. And also, as I mentioned, just getting in those hikes or being outside before 12 p.m. These are really the afternoon thunderstorms that have been peaking. So avoid that prime time during the afternoon and early evening. If you are doing some hiking, then we have some beautiful areas to do some hiking, especially with the water and the waterfalls, even some minor ones. It's going to be really nice. A place like Auburn, which is right along I-80 down in the foothills below the Sierra. We're going to find dry conditions, but the hazards still remain. We could find some minor flooding, as well as the bugs. They're pretty nasty this year. And the sun is out, so watch out for that. Want to make sure to avoid the sunburns. As far as our flood advisories, you can see we still have some concerns, especially from our many area rivers for the higher elevations, one of which we've been covering time and time again. That's going to be the Merced River at Pahono Bridge near Yosemite. Due to snowmelt, Yosemite closure at the east end, we've been following that. So you just need to check ahead before you head up to Yosemite. A lot of impacts are being felt around the communities as well that depend on a lot of the tourism that comes in this time of year. For folks that can't navigate into certain parts of Yosemite, they're being rerouted, and it's unfortunate because this winter really did a number on us that are still having the lingering effects. As far as our temperatures for today, warm for Palm Springs, but everywhere else was at or below average. We've got a persistent weather pattern that is actually going to keep us into the beginning of June with a very likely cooler scenario. So the holiday weekend looks to be on the cooler side, and that continues into next week. And it looks to be wetter as well. So we'll continue to see that chance of showers and thunderstorms into our forecast. Now, if you're traveling throughout Northern California, here's a look at what those temperatures will be like for our Friday forecast. We'll be near 60 for the high country, 60s and 70s down low for the foothills. And that's why this will really be a pretty place to do some hiking. The grass is still green. That is not necessarily the case in many years where it's already browned out with the golden hills of California. Near 60 along the coast for Santa Cruz. We're at a high of only 60 degrees, lots of fog. For the holiday weekend forecast, 61 for San Francisco. Head inland, we're into the 70s. As we move through the valley, highs will be in the 70s to right around 80. A little bit cool for this holiday, but should be pretty nice to do a picnic or just be outside. But the 5-day forecast region-wide, we call for that chance of thunderstorms in the mountains. That's not necessarily the case for the lower foothills, but the upper foothills still have a chance of some of those rotating thunderstorms to move their way westward into the foothills. And for the coast, as I mentioned, it is going to be on the cooler side with highs in the upper 50s to right around 60. 10-day forecast for the valley. We keep it cool here for the next 10 days, not seeing a huge warm up until we get to the end of next weekend.